All right, let's dive into The Passion of the Western Mind. It's a deep dive this time.
It certainly is.
Richard Tarnas, the author, he takes on, well, like the whole history of Western thought.
I think one of the things that makes Tarnas's book so compelling, though, is that it's not just a dry recounting of facts and figures,
Oh,
It's
about
like a
that.
story, almost.
Yeah,
A story of how these ideas kind of like wrestled with each other and evolved over time, ultimately shaping the way that, we see ourselves and the universe.
exactly, yeah. And that's what we're going to try to do today in this deep dive is to untangle some of these threads, these ideas, and see how they still resonate with us like today, even though, they were born centuries ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how these ideas, like from ancient Greece or, the Middle Ages, they still have this power to kind of like grab hold of us and make us think?
Yeah, yeah. So where do we even begin with something this massive?
Well, I think the natural starting point is where Western thought really kind of took root, ancient Greece.
Okay, ancient Greece. So like togas and the Parthenon?
Exactly.
But how did their ideas influence, us today?
Well, you've got to think about it. The ancient Greeks, they were kind of obsessed with this idea of like finding order in the chaos of the world.
Yeah.
Like they believed there were these universal truths, these underlying principles that governed everything. And this idea had a huge impact on, well, just about everything: art, architecture, politics, even, the way we think about morality and ethics.
Okay, so give me an example. Like, what's a specific idea from the Greeks that still matters to us?
Well, take Plato's theory of forms, for example.
Oh, yeah, Plato, right?
This idea that there's this higher realm of perfect, eternal forms. And everything we see in our world, like you and me, these chairs, the trees outside, they're just like imperfect copies of those perfect forms.
Okay, so it's like there's this ideal blueprint behind everything, and we're constantly trying to kind of like grasp that perfect form through, I guess, like reason and observation.
Exactly. And this idea, it's had a huge impact on, like I said, just about everything. Like, the way we think about beauty, the way we design buildings, even the way we organize society. It's all about trying to kind of, reflect those higher principles as perfect forms.
But the Greeks weren't all about like, abstract ideas, right?
No, not at all.
They also really seem to like embrace life and an individual experience.
Yeah.
I mean, think about all those sculptures, those plays, those poems. They were really into celebrating the human form and, the whole spectrum of human emotions.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's actually one of the things that makes Greek thought so fascinating. That tension between the pursuit of universal truth and the celebration of the individual.
Mm.
They're trying to reconcile these two impulses. This desire for order and meaning on the one hand,
Mm.
and this embrace of like the messy, complexity of human experience on the other.
Yeah, that tension, that balance between, the universal and the individual, that's something that seems to have like really stuck with us.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a tension that we're still wrestling with today in all sorts of ways.
And it only gets more complicated when Christianity comes along and throws like a whole new set of ideas and values into the mix, right?
Right. Absolutely. Christianity, it really kind of like revolutionized the way people thought about, the world, about themselves, about everything, really.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a different way of looking at things with its focus on faith and revelation and the divine. It's like, how did that impact like the whole trajectory of Western thought?
Well, one of the things that might surprise you is that early Christian thinkers were actually heavily influenced by Greek philosophy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, particularly Plato. They saw some pretty striking parallels between his ideas about a higher realm of forms and, the Christian concept of heaven, of the divine.
Hmm. So even though Christianity offered this like whole new framework for understanding the world, it wasn't like a complete break from the past. It kind of built on those Greek foundations.
It's
But I guess it also brought in some brand new complexities as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest ones was this whole tension between, spirit and matter, the Greek emphasis on, reason and observing the natural world, that was still there. But now there was this added dimension of faith and this belief in a spiritual realm that's, beyond our senses.
Right. And then there's the whole idea of the Virgin Mary.
Oh, yeah, the Virgin Mary.
It's like that brought in a feminine dimension into what was you know, largely patriarchal religious system.
Yeah, absolutely. The veneration of Mary as like this mother figure, this source of compassion and intercession, it definitely added a whole new layer to the Christian worldview. It brought in themes of love, nurturing, the power of the feminine, all of that.
Okay, so we've got the foundations of Western thought laid by the Greeks, and then Christianity comes along, adds this like whole new layer of complexity. Where do we go from there?
Well, we move into the medieval period. Now, it's often stereotyped, as the Dark Ages, but it was actually a really crucial period for the development of Western thought. It was during this time that the church really kind of became this central force in not just, spiritual life, but also in preserving and transmitting knowledge.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I always thought of the medieval period as a time when like intellectual inquiry was, kind of stifled by the church.
Yeah, it's more complicated than that, though. I mean, while the church certainly held a lot of power, there were also these vibrant intellectual movements happening. Like, think of the Scholastic Awakening. You had scholars like Thomas Aquinas who were trying to reconcile faith and reason.
Wait, Aquinas tried to like combine faith and reason. I thought those were supposed to be like totally separate realms.
Yeah, that was the prevailing thought. But Aquinas argued that you could actually learn about God by studying the natural world. Like his idea of natural law suggested that creation itself, reflected God's design and purpose.
So like by observing the world around us, we could gain insights into the divine. That's a pretty radical idea for the time.
It was radical, and it wasn't universally accepted either. You had thinkers like William of Ockham pushing back, arguing that God's will is absolute and can't be like limited by human reason. He believed that faith and reason were fundamentally, separate spheres.
Huh. Which which actually sounds a lot like the separation we often see today between like science and religion.
Exactly.
It's amazing how these debates from centuries ago are like still so relevant.
Absolutely. And this tension between faith and reason, it just becomes even more pronounced as we move into the Renaissance, this period of, cultural rebirth and a renewed interest in human potential.
The Renaissance. That's when things start to like really shift dramatically. We go from a God-centered worldview to a more human-centered one.
Exactly. It's not that people abandon religion altogether, but there's this new emphasis on human capability, creativity, the power of the individual.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah. And I guess that shift sets the stage for some pretty monumental upheavals like the Reformation, the scientific revolution.
precisely. And that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
This is already so fascinating, though. It's amazing to see how these ideas from like centuries ago are still shaping our world today. We've got a lot more ground to cover in our exploration of the passion of the Western mind. So join us for part 2, where we'll dive into the Reformation, the scientific revolution, and the birth of the modern world. And if this conversation has sparked your curiosity, pick up Richard Tarnas's book and continue your own deep dive. You won't regret it.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the passion of the Western mind. Last time we were talking about how the Renaissance really shifted things, from a God-centered worldview to one focused on human potential and achievement.
It feels like that set the stage for some pretty major shakeups like the Reformation.
Oh, absolutely. The Reformation, sparked by Martin Luther's challenge to the Catholic Church, totally changed the religious landscape of Europe.
And the scientific revolution, too.
Right. And it's interesting how this religious event actually had some pretty big secular consequences.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about it. The Reformation broke the Catholic Church's monopoly on religion.
Okay.
Suddenly, you had all these different Christian denominations, each interpreting the Bible in their own way.
Right.
This opened the door to religious pluralism, but also to skepticism, right?
Yeah.
If there wasn't one single right interpretation of truth, maybe it was up to each individual to figure out what they believed.
So it's like the seeds of individualism were planted right there during the Reformation.
Exactly. And as people started questioning religious authority, it led to this disenchantment of the world.
What do you mean?
Well, the idea that God was directly involved in everything started to fade.
Okay.
The natural world, once seen as like a reflection of God's glory, well, it became an object of study, something to be analyzed and understood through reason and observation.
So as people looked for answers outside of divine intervention, that's where the scientific method comes in.
Exactly. Thinkers like Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, they began challenging long-held beliefs but basing it on observation, experimentation, and mathematical reasoning.
Which must have caused some friction with the church.
Oh, yeah, big time. The Copernican model, putting the sun at the center of the solar system,
Right.
totally contradicted the church's geocentric view.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about astronomy either, it was a direct challenge to the church's authority and how people understood their place in the cosmos.
So one scientific theory shook up the whole worldview.
It did, and it didn't stop there. Thinkers
Hmm.
like Francis Bacon, they saw science as this tool to master nature,
Ah,
to improve human life.
right.
And this led to all kinds of advancements in medicine, agriculture, technology,
Hmm.
a whole new era of progress.
We also see changes in philosophy around this time too, don't we?
Oh, for sure. René Descartes, with his famous "I think, therefore I am," he made the individual mind like the center of his philosophy. Okay. He separated mind and matter, saying the only thing we can truly know is our own existence.
Right.
This emphasis on reason and the individual further challenged tradition and outside sources of knowledge.
So it's like during this period, we see the emergence of the modern individual.
Exactly. Someone who thinks for themselves, questions authority, and seeks knowledge through reason and experience.
And then there's Newton.
Ah, yes. Isaac Newton,
Hmm.
his laws of motion and universal gravitation.
Yeah.
Well, they gave us a new understanding of how the physical world works.
Right.
It's like he cracked the code showing the universe ran on predictable mathematical laws.
But even with all these advancements, there were still questions and challenges, weren't there?
Absolutely. I mean, the rise of science led to amazing discoveries, but also raised questions about faith, the meaning of life, and the limits of reason. It's a tension we're still grappling with today.
This takes us right into the Enlightenment then.
Exactly. The Enlightenment really doubled down on reason and individual liberty.
Okay, so welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into the passion of the Western mind. I feel like we've covered so much ground already, from the ancient Greeks all the way to like postmodernism. It's pretty amazing to see how like all these ideas connect.
Yeah, it's like a giant puzzle. With each piece you fit in, you start to see the bigger picture.
Exactly. But now I'm wondering, like, where does all this leave us today? I mean, we've questioned so many of our basic assumptions about knowledge and truth, even our place in the universe. Like, how do we even begin to make sense of it all?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, Tarnas doesn't give us like a step-by-step guide or anything.
Right.
But he does point to a couple of interesting trends. For example, he talks about this resurgence of interest in alternative perspective, like feminism, ecology, spirituality.
Yeah, it's like we're starting to recognize the limits of a purely rational, materialistic worldview. Like, there's got to be more to life than just what we can see and measure.
Right. And that's where things get really interesting, I think. Because Tarnas starts to explore some pretty out there ideas.
Okay, like what?
Well, for instance, he delves into this field called perinatal psychology.
Perinatal.
Yeah. It's basically the study of how the experience of birth, like literally being born, can shape our understanding of the world.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow. How does being born, like, relate to the big picture of Western thought?
Well, think about it this way. In the womb, we experience the state of total unity, right?
Mm.
We're completely immersed in this warm, fluid environment. And then, bam, we go through this incredibly intense process of separation and individuation during birth. And Tarnas suggests that this experience might actually leave a lasting imprint on us.
Oh, wow.
Like this deep-seated yearning for that lost unity, a drive to reconnect with something larger than ourselves.
So you're saying our desire for spiritual connection, our search for meaning, might actually be rooted in this primal experience of separation.
It's a possibility. And Tarnas takes it even further, suggesting that the whole trajectory of Western thought could be seen through this lens. Like the shift from a mythical worldview to a rational one, the emphasis on individualism. It's like we're trying to make sense of that initial separation.
Wow. That's pretty mind-blowing. But it does make you think about how many stories and myths, revolve around these themes of separation, loss, and the search for reunion. I mean, like the Garden of Eden, the hero's journey.
Right. Exactly. Those stories resonate with us, I think, because they tap into something very deep within our collective psyche. And Tarnas thinks perinatal psychology can help us understand these patterns and maybe even transcend them.
This is all so fascinating, but it also feels a bit, well, overwhelming, to be honest. Like, if we're all imprinted with this birth trauma, as Tarnas suggests, can we ever really escape it? Like, can we ever truly find that sense of wholeness we're looking for?
That's the challenge, right? But Tarnas believes we can. He sees the Western mind as constantly evolving, trying to integrate these seemingly contradictory impulses. He sees hope in the rise of movements that emphasize interconnectedness empathy, a more holistic understanding of the world.
So it's not about like rejecting reason or science, but about finding a way to balance them with, I guess, like intuition, compassion, a recognition that we're all interconnected.
Exactly. He sees this as the next chapter in the evolution of the Western mind. He doesn't give us all the answers, but he does give us a new way of thinking about these challenges.
I'm definitely going to need some time to digest all this. It's a lot to process.
Yeah.
But I got to say, this deep dive into the passion of the Western mind has been really like eye-opening. It's given me a whole new perspective on history and on, myself, really.
And that's what makes it such a powerful book, right?
Yeah. It's not just about understanding the past, it's about understanding ourselves, like right now, and then using that understanding to create a better future.
You said it. And remember, the conversation doesn't have to end here. Pick up the book, think about it, talk to your friends about it.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And let us know what you think. Head over to our website, share your thoughts, your questions, your reactions. Let's keep this conversation going.